So thank you so much for coming this month at Kulturfolger. The topic of the month is void. And most all of you have been here, but if you have not, so we have every month a new topic. And this year we've been looking at the idea of the uncommon. So how to kind of start to talk to each other and understand these areas where there's a gap or a missing or kind of an uneven ground. So we've looked at several different topics over the year, and every month we kind of create a reading group. We have a speaker, which tonight is Miro Roman, and we have an artist. The artwork of this month is Huber, and you can see these are some stones here that have an autoshalak on them, and the light is off now, but it was quite interesting because you kind of see many reflections of different things. So we've been kind of looking at this topic of void this month through different ways. We started in 2015, and we have a publication, if any of you are interested, that's over here that you can look at after the talk. And we are myself, Petra, and Marcel, who run the space, and we welcome you very much, and I will turn it over to Petra. Yeah,
Thank you everyone for coming, and I'm happy to say hello to Miro. Miro, most of you know. I know him as well for some time, and he's here because he's smart, not because I like him. And Miro is going to talk about a lot of things today. So it will be his research that deals with the many on the internet, and how can we actually navigate in this multiple, using the void as a kind of a starting point, or a notion that revolves around how can we build stories and how can we reflect ourselves in the void. As most of you know, Miro is an architect. He studied in architecture in Croatia. Then he went to his master in ETH, did a research in Singapore at the Future Cities Laboratory, and now he's doing his PhD at the Chair for Architecture. I don't know, I'm so nervous, no? At ETH. So I'll leave you to talk, and then we will have a little bit around of questions, so you can be free to ask anything.
Thank you for this beautiful introduction. So, yeah, thanks for having me. So, thank you, Lisa, Petra, and Marcel. So I would anyway be here because I'm always here. I'm like a groupie of Kulturfolger. I like it very much. But if I'm not in Kulturfolger, I'm also a part of a research group, which is somehow situated in between Zurich and Vienna. So between ETH Zurich and TU Vienna, it's a chair for computer-aided architectural design in Zurich and a chair for architectural theory and philosophy of techniques in Vienna. And tonight, in Kulturfolger, I will discuss, in the context of the topic of void, I will show a part of a project on which I was working together with Diana Alvarez-Marin. And in principle, what brings us together from Zurich and from Vienna is a kind of an interest in information. It's an interest in data. So how these phenomena change the way how we look at the world. In my work, I try to explore mostly what are computational objects. So what are computational objects in architecture? What is the relationship between computational objects and data? How has this relationship influenced the cities? So what is a public space in the digital? And in principle, how do we deal with a lot? So how do we deal with the abundance of information? And this story that I'm going to tell, it's not science and it's not art. but it's always being a part of both, and this is what's architectural about it. And as well, in this story, everything is taken from somewhere. So in principle, nothing from here is mine. Nothing is produced by me. So I just bring these elements into relation. I build certain constellations, which is again a very architectural gesture. So what I want to talk tonight are three concepts. So what is the relationship between the void, between a brand, and a lot? In the context of this are aliens, mutants, migrants, cyborgs, avatars. So what is their world about? What kind of object they use? How do they behave? How do they read? What is natural for them? And what's interesting is that there is more and more of them, yeah? And they're never pure. So they always come in different mixtures, in different kind of mixtures of different creatures, of different worlds, of reality and fiction, of different media. And this is what, in principle, makes them interesting. Yeah? You cannot put them in boxes, and you cannot put labels on those boxes. And we can say that they live on internet, they live on the Google planet, they hang out with other avatars, with other aliens, and they use social media as a way of transportation. So they tell a lot of stories, and branding is a way how they express themselves. They can pay, of course, they pay in bitcoins if it's needed. They play with information. They are information, but as well they are us. So what they give us is the ability to have many faces. So we can have many avatars, many virtual identities, and we can play with them in different ways. But how do we do it? So I think that this relation between the void, the brand, and the lot might be an interesting way how to get there. I think void is a crucial strategy when we try to deal with the lot, with the abundance of things. And here I want to give a few examples how we can approach it in different ways. So what does it mean to have an empty center? What does it mean to have an empty container? A symbol that can symbolize anything, for instance like X. Or can a void be seen as a spectrum? Can void have different qualities and different quantities? So can we have different qualities and quantities of nothing? Like, for instance, the negative numbers. Yeah? So here, if we look at Lucretius from 2000 years ago, he has an interesting thought on this. So he says, therefore, it's indisputable that, as I have been seeking to prove by penetrative reasoning, what we term void exists as an ingredient in things. So this is an interesting concept. Void as an ingredient in things. So it's a kind of a mixture of the matter and the void. A similar gesture happens in Barth's Tokyo. So Barth, in his book, The Empire of Science, is referring to Tokyo. So he says, the city I'm talking about, Tokyo, this is Tokyo, offers this precious paradox. It does possess a center, which is this, but the center is empty. The entire city turns around the site both forbidden and indifferent, a residence concealed beneath foliage, protected by moats, inhabited by an emperor who is never seen, which is to say, literally, by no one who knows. So here we have a kind of a generic city, one of the biggest in the world, and we have this empty center on which we can project the emperor, the power, the tradition, institutions, society, hierarchy. So it's a very similar situation like the British Queen. So she has all the power, but she can never use it. And I think in order to have a consistency of these kind of elements, we need the void in which we can always project different stuff. Or for instance, fashion. Yeah? Fashion is a beautiful example when it gets to this kind of games. Yeah? So it's very dynamic. Every season a new collection, it always has to be new, it's never too explicit, but it always has to be kind of consistent, it's always the same brand, different things. So we have this kind of very fancy brand which just now moved to Zurich, Vetements. Yeah? So what they do, they take a kind of a ready-made objects, DHL. So they take a DHL t-shirt and then they are able to sell it for a lot of money, and they play with this. Yeah? So they play with this concept that they don't even show their name there. Yeah? Or for instance, they take street style. They take street style as a kind of a ready-made. Then what's interesting is that then they sent this street style, not explicitly, but implicitly to Venice. So these people in the German pavilion in Venice, they walk like they're on a fashion strip, and they get a golden lion. Huh? And the lady that gets a golden lion, Anne Imhoff, she wears a Balenciaga cap, and she has a Marxist text on the website of the German pavilion, which is beautiful. On the same exhibition, her partner is walking again like a fashion model, which she is for Balenciaga exactly, but in her free time or in her real time, she's a painter, and what she does, she paints paintings with the socks which carry the name of Vetements. And then the interesting thing is that this guy here is the main designer of both Vetements and Balenciaga, and he carries a jacket on which you have the IKEA logo, and this is Vetements jacket. So what I think here is it's very beautiful that we have this kind of fashion and art. We have avatars and brands. We have a kind of Marxism and luxury. And all these concepts, in an implicit way, dance around a certain lifestyle. So we have different brands which dance around a certain lifestyle. And the contradictions that they have, they're not a problem at all. So actually they like these contradictions and they push their brand by showing these contradictions. Another example, a similar story, Claude Lévi-Strauss, The Structural Study of Myth. So he takes as an empty center, as a void, a mythical hero, a Greek god. A god which is so empty that it can be loaded with new messages repeatedly for 2,000 years. It's a very beautiful concept. So it's an empty center again, but this empty center has a certain consistency. Strauss calls this a structural consistency, but we can look at it in different ways. So now we can ask ourselves, like, where is the empty center in architecture? So I would say that this is not the empty center, but this is the void of architecture. This is the generic plane of architecture. Huh? So everything becomes very similar here in this kind of constellations. And the question is how to put an axis on top of this, around which we can revolve certain avatars and get a certain expression from the generic plane or from the void that this creates. So here we have all these kind of beautiful brands, beautiful architects, famous buildings, architectural blogs, magazines, books, manifestos, images, videos. They have different styles, different approaches, different drawings, different thinking. There are different schools, traditions. They celebrate big cities, small cities, sustainable cities, green cities, smart cities, stupid cities, dangerous, adventurous, and so on. And what is this all about? So in principle, we don't know, and we can never know exactly what this is about, and that's beautiful. So it's a kind of a position without a fixed point, a void. It's a kind of an attitude. So it's an architectural problem, it's a cosmic problem or not, I'm not so sure. But what we need to learn is how to play and how to surf with this. So how do we deal with all this media, with all this information? Or how are the prominent people, prominent architects doing it? So how do they make their own brands? What kind of strategies they are using? So this is a kind of a question. So it's always an interplay of surfing, navigating, learning, training in the world of a lot. And in principle, what comes from a kind of a conservative viewpoint is the usual scenario of dissolvement. So this is the creation of the void, the creation of the generic plane of architecture. It's a kind of an articulation of the generic, and this is true in a way. So we have books, architectural books, they have a very strong vector, or any kind of books, a certain message. Then we have, let's say, magazines, they collect different kind of approaches, put them together. Then we go online, take this to infinity, we have a huge number of these things. Via social media, we just index them, create certain communities, and then in the end we end up with Google, which is dissolving everything. You just get a lot of everything and you don't know what to do. So it's kind of from Pritzker to Google. And this is a kind of a dissolvement. Yeah? But what if we look at this in a way that it's not a dissolvement, but an encapsulation of each one? Each one is pointing to the other one, and actually it's enriching each other. Yeah? So this is an interesting way how we can start to think about this. So then how do we look? How do we develop an attitude? So what is the digital bringing to the table? So this is not the end of history, but an intensifying and multiplying of different histories, Sam Jacob would say. So we can say that the time is not flowing linearly anymore, but it's percolating, it's circular, it's spiral, it's the past, future, and present mixing. So we have this kind of pre-post, neo, retro, futuristic, bio, techno, and this is all a question of choice and a question of taste. So it's digital and it's immediate. So we have a kind of a porn and drama which mix in a new kind of public space around a new kind of literacy of a quantum city, let's say. But the notion of a lot, in principle, is not so new. So we have all these kind of 20th century cool architects that deal with a lot. So we have this, from Mies van der Rohe, there is this parole, less is more. Yeah? And then you have all these famous guys in the 20th century which reply to this. They say, less is a bore, I'm a whore, more and more and more and more and more and more is more, yes is more, and so on. So they all try to engage with a lot. So this is a kind of a spectrum of approaches which tries to deal with complexity, capital, genericness, branding, and these kind of things. But this is a kind of an architectural cliche. So how do we avoid that we don't become just another person that brings another more to this? Yeah? So we need a kind of a distance towards this. So how to step out and how to play with this? How to look without judging and making parodies? So how do we, for instance, scan 10, 20 or 30 years of architectural universe? How do we imagine what is it about? How do we think about information? How do we develop an attitude? And then here we have like the avatars, the bots, the crawlers, the Google, the cryptocurrency, social media, they play already this game. But how can I as a person behave there? So this should be different than my teacher, because I would say that I'm in a different world. So let's make a kind of an impossible task for a 20th century person. Scan 10 years of online architectural publishing in one afternoon and get a sense of what is it about. So something like a personal trend checker. And to get a feeling of what is around, I will scan 2 main architectural blocks. So all of their content, and then make articulations of this. And the focus are images. So if we want to play the game of information like these guys do, we need to store, deal, emit, and receive. We need to encrypt and decrypt. So in a way to open the crypt and translate the physical from the crypt into another space. Or in different terms, we need to write a poem in a language which is not natural. So this is a kind of a leitmotif, a coding as a literacy. And now let's get to the blocks. So what are the faces of blocks, or how do we curate the curators? So to get the feeling of what's around, I scanned 2 main blocks, ArchDaily and Dezeen. And if we look just in terms of the amount of stuff they produce, we can see here that in 2008 it's around 2,000 to 3,000 images per year from ArchDaily, while in 2016 it's 30,000 images per year. So this means it's a kind of a factor 10 of the amount of stuff. And there is going to be more and more of these things on the web. So how do we look at them? What do we do? How do we collect, curate, mediate, measure all this stuff? So the interesting thing is that if we think of internet as a kind of a public space, and this kind of a public space is not anymore reserved only for big players like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and these guys, but we can access this public space. And by accessing this public space, we just take their techniques. So we do what they do, we imitate them, and we become kind of an active persons in this public space. So this space is still not articulated, it doesn't have its proper institutions completely, it doesn't have the codes of behaving, and so on. So we can just go and now take everything what's public from online publishing. So let's take a walk in this public space. And the interesting thing is that this is in principle not so complicated as it looks like. So you need to write a small poem, and this is a kind of a poem that you write. So it's a crawler, it's a bot, a small program, and by doing this you can collect all the images. And here it is. So we just run this crawler. We go to ArchDaily, so this is a poem that takes everything from ArchDaily. We get the daily links, so what's on today. And we say, okay, now great. Give me the images from the first article. So he says, okay, on the first article we don't have enough images. Okay. Then let's go to the second article. Now he's going and searching. We get the images from the second article. We go to ArchDaily and check what's going on there. So the Burning Man doesn't have a lot of images, so we go to this one. This is what we take from all this kind of stuff. So I told him, if you have less than 3 images, don't take anything. If you have more, then take everything. Or yeah, now we can go like this for forever. Go to the third article, collect everything what's there, and so on. And now if we just say, okay, the start page is 1 and the stop page is 2,500, that's the amount they have, in one day we get everything. Or you can then articulate this that you get the text or whatever you want. So in this case I was taking only images. So the interesting thing is that you are able to take everything. So in this case from Dezeen and ArchDaily I took more than 500,000 of images. But then the question is, so what do we do with this? You have a 500,000 of images, and you need to get a kind of a sense of it. So how do we deal with a lot after we are able to take it? So this is an informational game. So we need to give kind of identities to images. So we need to curate them, mediate them, we need to measure them in a way. So they need to be translated into numbers, they need to be informationally encoded, they need to become vectors. But how do we measure them? What is the unit? So here the interesting part is that one needs to articulate the measure and the unit. So we cannot directly rely on the universal measuring units like the second, meter, kilogram, candela, mole, ampere, and Kelvin. So these are the units from which we derive all the other units. But here we play a slightly different game. So what does it mean to leave this thing? But I mean, in principle, we don't leave it. So these are beautiful units that united us. So we just have a different aspect of looking. It's just another way of looking at the units, and it complements the first one in a way. So with Karen Barad, what she is saying, what is the measure of nothingness? And she says, measurements are world-making. Matter and meaning don't pre-exist, but they rather co-constitute are co-constituted via measurement interactions. So this is, we are again with Lucretius, the measurement, the measure of nothingness. The nothingness is an element in things. So we have this kind of matter and meaning, nature, culture, what do I look, how do I look? It's a kind of a constitution game. With electricity, we have this all the time. So it's a kind of an energy, it's matter, it's information, it's a particle, it's a wave, depending how we want to have it. And these co-constitutions contradict each other, but this is in principle not a problem. So the thing is, how do we leave this universal unit in order to avoid these kind of clumsy statements like I would say Barad makes? So measurements are world-making. So what does this mean? Measurements are world-making, or the world makes the measurement? Do we have many worlds, and so on? So here it gets a kind of a tricky, almost a kind of a chicken-egg problem. So if we look at this from a perspective of encryption and decryption, then maybe it's a different game to play. And now one manner of articulating the measure and the unit of an image. So how to encrypt an image, how to give an informational face an image. So as an example, here we take the Hamburg Philharmonie, and now we want to give it an informational face. So how do we do it? So from this kind of an image, we say, okay, now let's make it in a low resolution and check the color of each pixel. And for each pixel, we get 3 numbers. This is a kind of an RGB. And we do this for all the numbers, and we get this. If we put this to, for instance, 2, now we have only 4 numbers, and then we get a much smaller thing. Or we can look at the structure of an image. So we just look at the frequency of the edges inside of an image. Is it a lot or less, and so on. We count these frequencies, and we get these kind of numbers. Or we take, so it's the second line, only this one. Or we take this kind of programming language has these beautiful generic measures for images, so like mean, median, standard deviation, and so on, energy, entropy, and we don't even have to understand exactly what these things are. We can take this as well. Or we can transform images into waves. We can do a kind of Fourier transform and then get a set of complex numbers which can articulate the face of an image. So we can, in principle, choose whatever we want from this, and we can group it in different ways. So if we take, for instance, a second image, and then we change, we say here, okay, now it has 7, and we make a kind of that gets more blurry with the waves, we get a different kind of thing. And this is an informational face of an image. The interesting thing here is that how we articulate this is not, so it goes beyond the objective and subjective. So it's a way how we want to have it. And we can change this, and by changing this, the whole game is always different. And we always have a kind of a backup in mathematics for it, but it's in a way subjective. So it's always a part of both. So what's interesting here is that the cryptography, measurement, and the communication are interwoven. There is no distinction between these things. And now the play starts. So ArchDaily and Dezeen, they are kind of characters, and we want to see what are their faces. But what they are telling us, this is up to us. This is the interesting thing. So the way how I look and what I am looking at, this makes the articulation. This is the world of data. So it's this kind of a generic informational materiality can be articulated in infinity of ways. So it's never good or bad, but it's always in a different kind of a spectrum. And then we get back the terms like consistency, sophistication, beauty, branding. They become a part of this spectral constitution. So first we take all. So we take 300,000 images. We make a kind of an artistic cloud, or an architectural mutant of ArchDaily and Dezeen. So it's a 10 years of architecture in one image, in one impression, a kind of a face, a rendering. So it's almost like a cloud, like a weather. This is what we get. And here we can play, of course, with different kind of resolution. We can play with different kind of consistencies. We get different things depending how we want to have them. So then we can make this kind of very silly things that you see that, for instance, architects don't like a lot yellow and red, but they are more fond of blue and gray and this kind of things. Or if we want to have it in a kind of an infinity, then we get this kind of map. So this is only ArchDaily. It doesn't have to be mixed. So we can also have it the way we like it. Of course, we can do many different renderings. So one of these different renderings can be, for instance, to make postcards. So the ArchDaily and Dezeen, they are sending us postcards. They're yearly postcards. So, for instance, this one is from Dezeen. This comes from Dezeen. Each year, one postcard, and each of these postcards shows 400 most characteristic images of that year. If we want to, so here we can see that they like design, and they like architecture, a little bit of lifestyle. Or if we look at ArchDaily, so they like more drawings. Yeah? They don't have design, they have drawings, for instance. And then we can make different stories. But what we get out of this is a sense of what kind of photographies are in fashion, what kind of compositions are in fashion, what kind of colors, what kind of objects, moods, flavors, and so on. We get a sense of fashion. Or let's take Dezeen in a span of 10 years, 2017 and 2007. So what we can see here is in a way that the picture on the left from 2017 in principle is more complicated, it's more complex, it has more things inside than the one on the right. So if we make an edge drawing, this kind of a drawing which almost has this kind of Egyptian hieroglyphs setting, we see that here we have these parts with a kind of an empty space. Yeah? Here it's always full. So now I'm just speculating in storytelling. Yeah? So it's in 2007, the fashion was that you take pictures of objects which are in abstract empty space. Yeah? In 2017, the fashion is different. So we want to always have images which are animated, which are vivid in a kind of a context. Something is going on. They're more and more complicated. So then this is a funny thing, there is a measure how you can measure an entropy or disorder in an image. And if we measure the disorder of images in Dezeen, we can see that in principle the disorder of images or the entropy of images is rising in the last 10 years. Is this scientific or not, I don't know, but it's a kind of an interesting observation. And now let's search for flavors. Let's do a little bit of branding inside of this. So it's a kind of a trend, fashion, brand checker. Or maybe it can become a machine for articulating a personal brand. So what we do first is check certain consistencies, certain horizontal consistencies. Like for instance, this one and then this one and so on. Just we will take them out to see how they are consistent. Yeah? So if we take one part of this map out, we get something which are drawings. Yeah? So if we take the second one, so we get something which I call patterns. The interesting thing here is that we never in principle defined what is a pattern, what is a drawing, what is an object. So these things we never defined. The only thing that we defined is the database, so the thing that we look, and the way how we look, so the way how we articulate the informational face of these images. Or we also can get these things that we actually don't know what they are. So I cannot give an explicit term for what is this, but there is a certain consistency of this. Or this one is interesting. Yeah? So here you can see how these images, for instance, have a strong verticality here. This means that the structure of the image, the measuring of black and white pixels was more important than the color, for instance. So all these images have a strong verticality on the right and they cluster around these things. So now, since we said that this image here represents the whole ArchDaily or the whole ArchDaily and Dezeen, which means it represents 300,000 images, and here are shown only 2,500. This means that in each image we have the whole world. So now let's look at these vertical consistencies of those images. So this is when we go inside of each pixel. Yeah? So here we can see we have in each cell a different number of elements. And each of these cells then gives a certain flavor, a certain mood, a certain articulation. So we can even think that each of those cells can become an independent Instagram account. Yeah? And these Instagram accounts would have a good consistency in itself. Yeah? So it's a kind of Instagram machine, let's say. And again, we never define these things in advance. Yeah? So how can we use now this combination of different flavors in order to produce a brand? Yeah? So how can I play with this in order to get a kind of a personal consistency of my own brand, my own game? You know? So how can I use the trends in photography, in objects, in settings, in colors, drawings, motif, and so on, and not to fear of the abundance of data? So how can I play with all of this, check it fast, and do stuff? So first, I'm very fascinated at all that I'm playing this game, so that I'm able to do these things. So now let's use Google kind of strategies to articulate different avatars around this empty axis of the generic plane that we have in the beginning of ArchDaily of Dezeen, to make a kind of my lifestyle of a moment. So if we have the generic plane, I can say on this generic plane, okay, I don't like this furniture, I don't like these faces, I don't like this dark stuff. Or I can do it in another way, and I can say what I like. Yeah? So I say, okay, I like these drawings, I like the patterns, I like certain objects in nature. This consistency I like. I have certain things that I like, and I don't know exactly how to explain them. And this would be the empty center. Yeah, this would be the vertical axis on the generic plane of design and architecture. And this is in a way the strategy of the void applied on this. And now when I'm dealing with the stream, so in this case I have 20 images, but in principle I can put it on a stream of data, I make a kind of a filter, a lens that looks at the stream of data and it's not afraid of it. It's a kind of a filter, almost an automatic liking and disliking thing. So these are the 20 new images, and this is the stream. This can be millions here, and they can go with different streams. They are passing through this kind of a lens, and what we get is, okay, these are the things that I like, these are the things that constitute me, and these are the things that I don't like. So this is in a way my articulation with their elements, my projection of ArchDaily and Dezeen. And then I get these kind of things. So this is what I like. This is my empty center of today. So it can have different streams and so on, and it can have many avatars, many different avatars. And that's why it's important that the center is always empty, that we can project different streams on them. It's never explicit. So I can project whatever I like. Every day it's different, and every day I have a new face according to what I like. I can even take these things. I can have one day a face of things that I don't like. So it's like this kind of what these guys with fashion did. So this kind of void is never fixed. And I think by this we are going beyond this kind of a classical representation. So these abstract objects become symbolic. They are figures, fugues, faces, masks, atoms, elements, characters, avatars, indexes. And then it goes around infusing, narrating, doping about the context, about information, and about these articulations. And then the story is that if we think that the coding is a way of being literate, and if we think of internet as a kind of a public space, we behave in a certain manner. And of course, these kind of stories can be told in different kind of contexts. So for instance, if you are interested in text, or for instance, how books can love each other, or how books can hate each other, you can use similar techniques in order to deal with text and make this the same kind of narrations. But I will not go through this now, but if someone is interested, books can even flirt. So you can check these things out. That's it.